Someone came running through the market square, shouting, laughing, half out of breath. Piloni, drop that brick and listen. The desert prophet stood today inside the palace hall, before the golden throne of kings and idols carved on walls. He held a shepherd's weathered staff, twisted dark with age, a desert stick worn smooth by years of wandering the sage. Not gold like Pharaoh's scepter rod, not carved with priestly art, just desert wood from foreign sand, clutched tight within his heart. And Moshe spoke before them all. Thus says Hashem, the God of Israel, reach my people that they may serve me. The courtiers laughed beneath their crowns, the magician stepped ahead. If power walks with desert men, let Egypt's court be led. Then Aharon threw the staff down hard before the royal throne, and desert wood became a snake alive upon the stone. Its scales flashed black beneath the lamps, its coil struck hard and fast. The palace guard stepped stumbling back as courtiers gasped in mass. But Pharaoh's priests threw down their rods, with secret words they cried, and serpents struck the marble floor from every temple side. Serpents before the throne, hissing across the stone, coils of living shadow where Pharaoh sits alone. Serpents before the throne, the court drew back in fear, for one rose higher than the rest and struck the others near. The desert serpent lunged and struck with power none could name. It swallowed every serpent whole until but one remained. Then Moshe walked across the floor before the stunned array. He seized the serpent by the tail and would return that day. The staff lay quiet in his hand as though it always had, but none who watched could shake the truth of what their eyes had had. Pharaoh leapt up in burning rage. Seize him! Take the desert prophet! The guards rushed forward through the hall, their spears held high to strike. But Moshe raised his hand toward them and turned their courage white. His skin burst pale with sorrow, bright as bone in flame, and soldiers stumbled back in fear, calling curses in his name. Archers, Pharaoh shouted, shoot him where he stands. But bowstrings snapped like brittle reeds, falling from their hands. Serpents before the throne, and now a hand of snow, a sign no priest in Egypt's court had power yet to show. Serpents before the throne, the court was trembling wide, for something greater than their gods was standing there in pride. Pharaoh's voice cut through the hall, sharp as desert wind. Leave this court before I strike and never return again. But every man could see the truth behind the royal cry. The tyrant king who ruled the Nile was shaken deep inside. Pharaoh looked afraid. And for the first time in my life, I thought, we might be free. The decree came before sunrise, a trumpet in the square. The herald stood beneath the palace sail. Herald, hear the decree of Pharaoh, ruler of the two lands. You shall no longer be given straw to make bricks. Let the slaves gather straw for themselves, but the number of bricks required of them shall not be reduced. The drivers cracked their whips that dawn before the sun was high. The fields were stripped of broken stalks where brittle husks ran dry. The moles lay waiting in the pits where mud and sweat would stay. And someone cursed the desert man who'd come to stir the day. The lash came faster than before, the tally climbed like flame, and every man who slowed his hand was beaten just the same. No straw today, still 16 tons of clay. The drivers count the bricks again and curse us where we stay. No straw today, still 16 tons of clay. The mud is thick, the lash is quick, and none may turn away. The riverbanks were torn apart for reeds and brittle stems, but nothing filled the empty molds the way the straw had been. The sun climbed hard across the pits where backs were bent and gray, and every hour the drivers roared 16 tons of clay. The dust of bricks filled mouth and lungs, the sweat ran through the sand, and every man who faltered once felt leather on his hand. No straw today, still 16 tons of clay. The tally never bends or breaks no matter what we say. No straw today, still 16 tons of clay. The mud runs red where whips have fed upon our backs all day. A man beside me dropped his mold, his hands too torn to try. The driver raised the lash again and struck him where he'd lie. Move fast, the slaves, the overseer cried, the king has had his say. You'll build the bricks or feed the sand with 16 tons of clay. Hey! That night the elders found the man who spoke before the throne. Moshe stood beside his kin with Aaron alone. They cried to him in bitter rage, you've made our burden grow. You've given Pharaoh cause to strike the ones who bend below. And someone whispered through the crowd with anger in his breath, better chains we always knew than promises of death. No straw today, still 16 tons of clay. The night is long, the driver's strong, and hope feels far away. No straw today, still 16 tons of clay. The mud and blood mix in the flood where broken workers pray. The river still ran quiet that night. The temples burned their sacred flame, and somewhere in the dark Moshe prayed, because tomorrow he would return to Pharaoh again. Morning came like any other morning, priest walking the river steps, incense rising in the dawn, the Nile shining gold beneath the sun. Egypt's got a water waking for the day. I walked the river path at dawn, where workers gathered near. The mist still rising from the tide, the morning cool and clear. The priests were lifting silver bowls to greet the rising sun, for Egypt's life flowed from that stream since all their days begun. Then someone pulled my sleeve and said, Poloni, look who stands beside the king. The desert prophet faced the throne where sacred waters glide, and Aharon held the shepherd's staff above the morning tide. Moshe spoke before the court where Pharaoh watched the stream. Thus says Hashem, release my people from the hand of Egypt's stream. But Pharaoh laughed beside the bank where reeds bent in the breeze. For this small god of desert wind, you trouble kings like these. The Nile gives life to all the world and answers to my throne. So show your power, desert man, before these gods of stone. And raise the desert staff above the river wide, and every voice along the shore fell silent where they cried. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. Red runs the river where the living waters flowed. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. The God of the river cannot hide beneath the flood. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. The water turns to judgment where our children's blood once ran. The crimson spread along the banks, through canals and temple gates. The barges rocked in scarlet waves where priests had prayed to fate. The fish rolled pale against the tide, their silver bellies wide, and every man who touched the stream drew back in sudden fright. The smell of death rose in the heat where sacred waters ran, and every prayer the priest once sang fell silent in the sand. Oh, men dug wells beside the Nile with desperate bleeding hands, but mud and blood came seeping up across the thirsty land. Yet Hebrews filled their jars with water clear as desert rain, while Egypt clawed the river banks and found the red again. This morning now the Nile bleeds for my sons. The river of their empire runs a scarlet road. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. The priests stand helpless where their river god once flowed. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. For every child they cast away, into the Nile's command, the temples burned their incense thick to calm the rising fear. The magicians muttered secret words, but blood was everywhere. Pharaoh turned his crown aside as though the sign were small, for kings who claim the throne of gods do not admit a fall. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. The river of the empire has become a witness now. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. The priest can chant forever, but the river will not bow. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. When Hashem remembers promises, even rivers must avow. 7 days the river rotted, 7 days the priests explained, 7 days the people argued while Pharaoh held his throne. But somewhere near the palace gates Moshe spoke again, and Egypt held its breath, because the river had answered. This morning the Nile bleeds for my son. This morning the Nile bleeds for my sons. 7 days the river rotted, fish floating silver in the reeds.
priests burning incense thick as smoke, and every man who walked the Nile road asked the same question: what did we see? Then the trumpet sounded, the herald climbed the temple steps beneath the falcon crown. The soldiers formed a ring of bronze to keep the murmurs down. The scribes unrolled their polished scrolls, prepared to write the word, the version of the river's tale that Pharaoh wished me heard. The herald raised his voice and cried, "People of Egypt, hear!" And every whisper in the square grew suddenly unclear. Pharaoh says the river lies, the Nile still serves the throne. No desert god commands the flood that Egypt calls its own. Pharaoh says the river lies, let every man repeat. The blood we saw upon the tide was trickery and deceit. They said the river turned that day to purge a rebel's crime, a foreign curse from desert winds that priests would cleanse in time. They said the shepherd from the sands had stirred the sacred tide, a wandering criminal whose words were better left to die. So speak no praise of desert gods, nor spread the tales they bring, for every tongue that feeds that lie will answer to the king. Pharaoh says the river lies, the Nile obeys the crown. The gods of Egypt guard the land and will not be cast down. Pharaoh says the river lies, write it, carve it, proclaim, for scribes can shape tomorrow by deciding what to name. Meshach and Ra spat in the dust and laughed beside the clay. Peloni kings have ruled this river long before today. You saw a trick beside the banks, a clever desert show, but Egypt's gods have stood for years and will not bow so low. But Chaver leaned close and said with quiet in his breath, if rivers bleed beneath the staff, what waits beyond the next? The scribes wrote down the herald's words while markets hummed again, for kingdoms often mend their cracks by choosing which truth wins. And somewhere in the crowded square an old man shook his head, for nothing new lives under sun where power rewrites what was said. Pharaoh says the river lies, repeat it through the land. The Nile still bends before the throne by Ra's eternal hand. Pharaoh says the river lies, but every man who saw still dreams of crimson water spreading through the law. 7 days the river rotted, 7 days the priest explained, 7 days the herald shouted that the Nile still served the crown. But somewhere near the palace gate Moshe walked again, and Egypt held its breath for what would come next.
The river moved again that morning. We thought it was a ripple, then the water rose and something green climbed out.
What? 1, 2, 3, 4.
One frog stood upon the bank, as big as any dog.
It blinked its yellow temple eyes, that monstrous river frog. The soldiers laughed and jabbed their spears, drive that creature back. One guard swung hard with bronze-tipped staff. The frog burst open, croak.
2 frogs,
Then 10 frogs, then 50 more appeared. Every strike the soldiers made twice as many here. Croaking in the night, croaking in the streets. Frogs hopping through the palace gates and landing at our feet. Croaking in the night, croaking loud and bright. You strike the frog and 10 more come, croaking in the night.
right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
The giant frog hopped down the road. The guards gave frantic chase. They swung their spears and clubs again, and frogs flew every place. Green shapes bouncing off the stones, croaks that fill the sky. The harder that the soldiers struck, the more came leaping by. The market's filled with jumping frogs. The cooks began to grin. Frog stew tonight, the vendors cried as pots were lowered in. Croaking in the night, croaking in the square. Frogs hopping through the market stalls and landing everywhere. Croaking in the night, croaking without end. You strike the frog and more appear again and yet again.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The giant frog jumped back again, straight into the Nile tide. But soon the riverbanks erupted, green on every side. Frogs poured out across the land in rivers made of legs. They filled the roads and temple steps and palace marble ledges. They hopped into the baker's bowls, they leapt into the bread. They croaked inside the cooking pots and landed on the bed. You lift the lid to cook your meal, frogs staring back at you. You close your eyes to sleep that night, croaking in the room.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Croaking in the night, croaking in the bed, croaking in the ovens where the Pharaoh's cooks once fed. Croaking in the night, croaking in the throne, croaking in the palace halls where Pharaoh sits alone.
1, 2, 3,
Days
4.
passed without a moment's sleep. The croaking never ceased. The priests lost track of sacred words. The guards could find no peace. The giant frog still hopped about beyond the palace wall. Each time they struck the monster down, 10,000 more would fall. Then Pharaoh called for Moshe with anger in his breath. Remove these frogs from Egypt now, or plague us all to death. Moshe spoke with steady voice before the trembling throne. When should the frogs depart this land and leave your kingdom lone? Pharaoh raised his weary eyes, his voice both proud and sore. Tomorrow, let them leave tomorrow. The croaking shook the floor. Croaking in the night, croaking through the land. The frogs still sang their mocking song across the desert sand. Croaking in the night, but Pharaoh set the day, and when tomorrow's morning came, the frogs would go away. Croaking in the streets, croaking in the beds, croaking in the ovens, inside our heads, all night, no stop. Misha can run ox slow at dawn. I still tired but steady drawn. Still hear them show, but not the same. It fades to noise, it blends to plain. He rubbed his eyes, then laughed it through. Strange what a man gets used to. Croaking fills the air, croaking everywhere, croaking everywhere, croaking. Then horns rang out through Temple Square. Herald climbed the highest stair. By Pharaoh's hand the frogs are slain. His mighty word has cleared the land. The gods have bowed, the plague is done. Egypt restored by Pharaoh's hand. The crowd took up what priests had shown. All power leaves Now every footstep cracks the ground, every whisper feels too loud, and then it hits before it's seen. A smell that splits what silence means. The stench rolls thick along the street, heavier far than croaking beat. Where frogs once sang, now rot remains, piled in hills through roads and lanes. Sleep returns, then breaks again. Now every sound cuts deeper in. Oh, hips in the street, hips in the heat, hips in the street, hips. Stop the bricks, no quota stands. Clear the roads with every hand. No wall goes up, no count today, till every heap is hauled away. Gewerkt over, set down the clay. No bricks are made till this is clear. Cart by cart they tried to move, but no one could get passage through. Markets closed, the paths were sealed. No man could reach the trade or field. Banks ran thick, canals turned slow. The land itself refused to flow. Days went by, the sun burned down. The smell sat on the crown. A crown, a crown, a crown. And still they spoke in market lines. Pharaoh broke, the plague it's done. But every heap beneath the sun stood proof of what his claim had done. He took the crown for ending frogs. Now where's the weight of what remains? Oh, hips don't disappear, hips still sitting here. Rose again. The roads cleared out, the carts moved on, the ovens burned, the markets called, and Egypt said, we're back again. We're back again.
The frogs were gone, the streets lay quiet in the sun. Though the stench still rode the wind, carts rolled again. Markets open, brick pits filled with clay, and Pharaoh sat upon his throne, certain Egypt stood secure. Moshe stood beyond the gates where Pharaoh would not hear. Dust swirling through the morning wind across the palace square. He spoke to Elhanan quietly, where temple shadows stand. Stretch out your staff, strike the dust of Egypt, and Elhanan struck the sand. At first it arose like drifting ash caught in the desert air. Then every grain began to move. The living sand, Kini, you can't ignore 'em, Kini. The dust of Egypt crawling now across the cursed land. The living sand, Kini, you can't outrun 'em, Kini. From crown to beard to cattle hide, they rise from Pharaoh's sand. They fill the hair of every man, they nested in each beard. They crawled beneath the linen robes of soldiers standing near. They bit the necks of ox and mule, they swarmed the horses' hides. They burrowed in the palace cloth where Pharaoh's court resides. The dust we swept from Pharaoh's floors, the dust beneath his throne, now crawled across the skin of kings and claimed the land its own. The living sand, keeping, you can't ignore them, keeping the earth of Egypt rising now against the royal hand. The living sand, keeping, you can't escape them, keeping. The smallest plague becomes the key that breaks the mighty land. The priests who shaved for purity now scratched until they bled, for crawling lice across their skin defiled the rites they led. No temple song could hide the truth, no incense masked the shame. Forgive the God beneath their feet could not command the grain. The magicians came with whispered spells and struck the dust again. Their staffs fell hard upon the ground, but nothing would obey. The crawling earth ignored their charms, their secrets turned to air, and one stepped back in quiet dread as lies filled robe and hair. This is the finger of Elohim. The words fell sharp and plain. The court grew still as desert stone, while lies crawled through the grain, and Hebrews watched the overseers drop whips they could not hold. For no man drives a slave to work, while vermin take their toll. The living sand, Kini, you can't ignore them, Kini. From palace throne to cattle stall, they rule the choking land. The living sand, Kini, you can't outrun them, Kini. The dust of Egypt testifies against the Pharaoh's hand. Yet Pharaoh sat with hardened jaw, though crawling filled the hall, while scraps prepared their careful words to soften Egypt's fall. They whispered of a desert pest, a trial from the skies, and Pharaoh swore the God still stood behind his royal lies. The living sand, Kini, you can't ignore them, Kini. The earth itself bears witness now against the Pharaoh's hand. The living sand, Kini, you can't outrun them, Kini. Yet still the stubborn heart of kings refuses to understand. The scratching slowly faded, the dust lay still again. The priest declared the trial past and Egypt safe once more. But in the quiet halls that night, Moshe spoke again, and Pharaoh's heart grew harder than before. The scratching faded, the dust lay still. The crawling plague was gone and Egypt tried to breathe again. But no one forgot the words spoken in the court. This is the finger of Elohim.
Days passed beneath the desert sun while wounds began to close. The priests returned to temple steps, still itching through their robes. The brick pits filled with mud again, the carts began to roll, and taskmasters walked through Goshen with whips they meant to hold. One crack across the morning air sent silence through the clay. The work of slaves resumed again like every other day. But every overseer scratched his neck while shouting out commands, and every noble in the court still feared the crawling sand.
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
Though Egypt saw the sign,
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
and swore the throne was divine.
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
Though truth stood in his hall, a king who calls himself a god will never bend at all. The heralds climbed the temple stairs with scrolls prepared by dawn. The crawling dust was desert wind, the kingdom marches on. The gods of Egypt guard the land, the throne of Ra stands strong. No shepherd from the wilderness can prove our kingdom wrong. The markets nodded at the news, the scribes wrote every line, and Pharaoh sat above them all, certain he was divine. Yet whispers moved through shaded streets where laborers would stand, for every man who saw that dust still feared the living sand.
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
Though magicians spoke the truth,
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
and buried living proof.
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
Though fear filled every hall, a king who rules by pride alone will not release at all. And Ra laughed in the shade outside his painted door. You see, he said to Pelani, the worst of this is o'er. The desert prophet had his moment, a clever trick at best. But Egypt stands eternal still while shepherds fade to dust. Yet Tov worked beside the pits and spoke beneath his breath. If dust can rise against a king, what comes with teeth and death? Inside the palace Pharaoh raged, where golden pillars shone. No god of slaves commands the Nile, this land and throne are mine. Let Moshe shout beyond the gates, let shepherds curse the sand. Egypt bows to Pharaoh's will, and Pharaoh rules this land. The scribes wrote down his every word, the priests declared it law. But fear had settled in the court like cracks beneath a wall. Weeks passed beneath the desert sky. The brick carts filled the roads. The scars of bites began to fade. The priests resumed their oaths. And Egypt swore the danger past. The kingdom stood secure. For kings who rule the Nile itself have power to endure.
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
Though heaven's finger showed,
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
and sealed the desert road.
He hardened his hate-filled heart.
Though signs shook earth and sky, a king who will not bow to truth has already chosen why. Then early in the morning light, Tov came running fast. Peloni Moshe stands again before the palace pass. He speaks of beasts within the land, of creatures wild and free. And Pharaoh laughs before his court as though he cannot see. But somewhere in the quiet fields beyond the palace wall, something in the wilderness was listening to the call.
hate-filled heart.
I heard a scream not like before. We were lifting mud at dawn. Brake line said the whip's not drawn. Then something moved beyond the grain, a sound that didn't sound like men. I turned and saw the field break open. Not one thing, many, too many. A rove, I heard them come. A roll, the ground undone. Claws in the dust, wings in the sun. Everything running, everything wrong. I could not see who they were hunting, who they would be. Who they would be. Who they would be.
A lion tore through carts of grain, a wolf leapt straight through shouting men. Horses snapped and dragged their chains, falcons dropped on chariot reins. A man beside me tried to run, something took him from the side. I didn't see what struck him down, just blood that sprayed and bodies slide.
The gods broke first, they didn't stand. No order, no command. A rove, it filled the land. A rove, no one could stand. Teeth in the strong claws in command. The mighty fell where they once planned. A rove, I tried to flee, but something strange, it passed by me. I froze. It ran right past my side. A wolf, close enough to feel its breath. Its eyes were fire, but not for me. It leapt, not at me, past me. Egypt broke, spears dropped too slow. Shields split open blow by blow. Chariots crushed in turning lines. Oxen screaming, tangled blind. Men who beat us day by day, now dragged across the stones they paved. Their orders lost, their voices gone. Their strength meant nothing anymore. Me dug and they get me dug. You hunt the weak, now you are prey.
Now I can see it's not for me. The land itself has chosen sides and turned against their cruelty. No random hand, this is command. The one they mock now walks the land, and none can countermand.
We ran toward Goshen's edge in fear, thinking death would meet us there. But when we crossed the pasture line, nothing. Wind and grass, children playing, silence behind us, screams. It knew the line, it turned in time. Claws that tore through throne and shrine, stopped at something undefined. A rave, I felt it then. A rave, not beast but sent. The wild obeyed a voice unseen and bowed to its intent. They said the king cried out at last, go serve your God, just stay nearby.
But Moshe answered firm, and still we do not serve where idols lie. We walk the path that he commands, not bound to throne, not bound to land.
Break. And just like that, they were gone. Days returned, the mud was mixed, the whips came down the same as always. But something had changed. We worked and watched.
We saw it clear and lost the fear. The power that breaks a kingdom's hand stood quietly here. They felt it too. They always knew a throne that stood untouched, and for the first time we knew who was. The beasts had gone. The fields lay open once again, and Egypt told itself the terror had passed. But Moshe returned, released the people of Hashem to serve him in the wild. If you refuse to free the slaves, the land will lose its pride. Tomorrow sickness fills the fields where Egypt's strength has grown. The cattle, horses, sheep, and herds will fall beside the stone. Pharaoh barely raised his eyes, no desert god commands my throne. Morning came, the wind moved slow across the fields, and something passed unseen.
Death in the field.
Quiet and wide, the strength of Egypt falling down where cattle once had thrived.
Death in the field.
No sword, no cry, just breath that fades from beasts that built the kingdom standing high. The oxen dropped beside the plow where furrows cut the land. The horses stumbled in the dust that once obeyed command. Camels knelt along the trade roads and never rose again. And shepherd boys ran shouting news across the silent plain. The cart stood still beside the kilns, no hooves pulled stone that day. Yet far in Goshen's pasture grass, the flock still fed in peace. No sickness touched a single herd, no breath began to cease.
Death in the fields.
The silence grows. The beasts that carried Pharaoh's wealth now lie where clover grows.
Death in the fields.
The empire learns the hand that rules the wilderness is not the throne's concern. Pharaoh sent his riders out to see the truth themselves. They crossed the farms of broken carts and empty watering wells. They reached the hills of Goshen where Hebrew cattle fed. Not one had fallen in the dust, not one lay cold and dead. The riders stared in disbelief, then turned toward Pharaoh's throne. The scribes began their careful spin before the word returned. A sickness from the southern wind, bad pasture land and worms. But whispers outrun every lie from stable stall to town. The slaves have lost no beast at all, the death has struck us down. Meshach and Ra stood by the gate of an empty cattle yard. Without the oxen pulling stone, the work grows slow and hard. Cover tove white clay from his hands and watch the road lie still. If Hashem strikes down their herds today, what breaks tomorrow's will?
Death in the field.
The empire bends, The beast that built 1,000 towns lie broken in the wind.
Death in the field.
Yet Pharaoh's pride, though proof stands breathing in the grass, still will not step aside. The riders spoke, the court fell quiet, and Pharaoh heard the truth himself. The herds of slaves still lived. Yet Pharaoh hardened his heart, and somewhere beyond the palace walls, the prophet of Hashem prepared the next sign. Smoke in the morning air, not war cooking fires. Every street in Egypt smelled like roasted cattle. Butchers in the pasture fields cut meat before it spoiled. Cart wheels stacked with carcasses where oxen used to toil. Temples lost their sacred bulls, but fires still burn high. A feast across the city streets beneath the desert sky. Counting the dead herds, pile the meat high. Feast while the kingdom pretends it won't die. Counting the dead herds, drink while we can. Egypt is roasting the wealth of the land. Moshe can raw raise greasy hands with laughter thick and loud. Look, Poloni, Pharaoh feeds us all, he shouted to the crowd. He carved the sacred temple bull and tossed the bones aside. No debts today, no wages owed, the king himself provides. He shoved Kaveh toad from the fire and grabbed the fattest cut. Slave, your credits paid in meat, then laughed and filled his gut. Counting the dead herds, fire in the street. Kings and beggars all eating the meat. Counting the dead herds, bones in the sand. Egypt devouring the wealth of the land. But carts stood still beside the kilns, no oxen left to haul. The brick pits slowed to half their pace with fewer whips to call. Kaveh told wiped grease and dust from bruises on his arm. If Hashem struck down their beast today, what keeps the next from harm? Riders came from Goshen's hills with dust upon their breath. Not one Hebrew herd has fallen, only Egypt's death. The feast grew quiet for a beat, then laughter filled the square. But rumors ran faster than scribes could bury in the air. Counting the dead herds, the smoke climbs high. A kingdom celebrating what it cannot buy. Counting the dead herds, the fires burn low. And somewhere in the kiln yard, Moshe gathered soot for the next blow. The meat was gone, the bones lay white, and Egypt waited for the wind to change. But the desert prophet had not finished. And soon the skin of kings would burn. It was Ra's bright day, the streets were full. Merchants shouting, children chasing carts. Then Moshe lifted kiln ash from the slave fires and cast it to the wind. The soot rose spinning toward the sky, a dark and twisting cone. A black wind climbing higher still above the palace stone. It spread across the desert sun till daylight dimmed to gray, and ash began to fall like snow across the crowd that day. At first a sting upon the skin like sparks from kiln and flame. Then swelling sores began to rise where ash and bodies came. Burning boils break the skin, ash that bites like fire. The dust that built the Pharaoh's walls now feeds a darker pyre. Burning boils break the skin, the kill smoke fills the land. For those the gates, their robes torn from their backs. The swords climbed up their shaven flesh like crawling fiery tracks.
The magicians tried to face the man who spoke for Hashem's will, but none could stand before Moshe as boys spread thick and still. The whip hand shook with swollen sores, no overseer could strike, and those who beat the slaves for years now beg the slaves for life.
Bring water, bring the healing salves, turn the bandage tight, and Hebrew hands that once were chained now help them through the night.
Some offered coins for kindness done, some promised debts repaid, but swollen eyes watched carefully where hidden gold was laid. Days passed slow in burning pain, where Egypt lay in bed, while those who still could barely move sent slaves instead of dead. Meshach and cursed through broken skin, with sores across his jaw,
Yet still he spat Porini and blamed the desert law.
burning boils break the skin, that still fills the sky. The mighty crying out for help from those they once defied. Burning boils break the skin, the balance tilts at last. For hands once forced to slave in dust now hold the power fast.
Palace halls and crowded streets, the same strange sight was seen. The slaves moving among the sick where masters once had been.
And whispers pass from door to door across the wounded land. The prophet of Hashem still walks and Pharaoh still will stand. Burning boils break the skin, the kingdom rides in pain. Yet Pharaoh on his wounded throne still swears his gods remain. Burning boils break the skin and still the king proclaims, no desert god commands the throne, no prophet breaks his reign. Hey, hey. No prophet breaks his reign.
At last the sores began to fade. The ash clouds slowly clear, and Egypt rose again from bed, as though the danger disappeared.
But promises made in fevered pain soon vanished with the sores, and those who helped their masters live found whips return once more.
So the prophet of Hashem lifted his eyes again toward cloud.
Morning broke with heavy air. The prophet of Hashem stood where Pharaoh walked the river road.
Send out the people, he said, or tomorrow the sky itself will strike this land. Bring in your servants, bring in your cattle, for what stands in the open will not survive. Some listened, many laughed.
The clouds rolled black across the sun like drums across the sky. Wind shook the reeds beside the Nile as thunder answered high. Meshach and knocked on my gate with panic in his breath. Lend me your cattle for the storm, the fields are certain death. He swore he'd pay when skies were clear and led them down the plain, yet left them tied beyond the wall when
the house with goats and trembling sheep. The thunder beating on the roof like giants in their sleep. Outside the storm became a war of lightning, flame and stone. Hail that shattered cedar beams and crushed the Pharaoh's throne. Trees split open in the fields, flax and barley torn, while cattle scattered through the storm where chariot roads were worn. Heaven hurls ice and fire, storm drums never cease. Flames within the frozen stone strike the land of priests. Heaven hurls ice and fire, the heavens roar command. No crown can stop the thunder in Elohim's own hand. When morning came, the storm withdrew and silence filled the air. Broken branches scarred the fields and ruin everywhere. But in the pasture far from Goshen, where he left them tied, the cattle that Meshach and Ra had stolen still stood alive.
For where the children of Hashem stand, His mercy walks the land, even beyond the borders of Goshen's quiet sand.
Pharaoh called for Moshe then. I have sinned this time, he said. Elohim is just and the storm, and I will send your people free. Moshe walked into the fields and lifted up his hand. The thunder ceased, the hail grew still, and quiet filled the land. Heaven hurled ice and fire, the storm obeyed the call. Kings may bend for just a breath, then rise and curse it all. Heaven hurled ice and fire, the skies had made it clear. No throne can rule the heavens when Elohim draws near. Heaven hurled ice and fire, the drums fade from the sky. Fields of Egypt shattered now, where crops and idols lie. Heaven hurled ice and fire, yet Pharaoh still declares, no desert god commands the throne or rules the son of Ra.
The storm was gone, but broken statues lined the roads. And in the palace courts of Egypt, even the nobles whispered, the gods were beginning to fall.
Heaven hurls ice. Hey. Heaven hurled ice.
Broken statue filled the courtyards. Hail scars in the palace walls. The storm had passed, but Egypt had seen something it could not forget. Inside the throne hall, the advisors finally spoke. They gathered near the falcon throne where shattered idols lay. The courtier speaking carefully of fields the storm had flayed. The barley gone, the flax destroyed, the orchard stripped with ice. The temples cracked by thunder's hand, this land has paid the price. The scribes stood silent by the wall, their scrolls still warm with ink. For every man inside that room now feared what they might think. One noble stepped before the throne and bowed his trembling head. Great king, the land cannot endure the signs the shepherd said.
Send them away.
Egypt is destroyed before another plague descend, before the gods are void.
Send them away.
Let the slaves be free, or what remains of Pharaoh's throne will sink into the sea. The chains chamber filled with murmured fear that rippled through the hall. For men who ruled the Nile's long banks had never feared a call. The river bled, the beasts ran wild, the cattle filled the graves. The sky itself rained fire and ice upon the land of slaves. And still this desert prophet stands before the palace gate. How many signs must heaven send before we change our fate? The nobles raise their voices now, no longer soft with dread. Send them away before the storm returns again, they say. Send them away. Egypt is destroyed. No throne can rule the sky itself. No king command the void. Send them away. Let the people go before the hand that struck our land returns with one more blow. Pharaoh rose beneath the crown, his eyes like burning coal. You tremble at a shepherd's staff and fear a desert soul. Egypt bows to none but me. The gods still guard this throne. The hall fell silent as he sworn. This land is mine alone. Moshe stood beyond the gates and heard the palace roar. For rumor ran through temple halls like waves against the shore. And somewhere in the frightened court a truth no man could hide. The kingdom that had ruled the world was cracking from inside. His hand and chose to fight the God who ruled the sky and sea and land. So the desert prophet turned again toward Pharaoh's stubborn throne, and somewhere on the eastern wind a darker storm was forming.
Can't hear what? East wind pushed and held its breath. Sky went thick like coming death. Not a cloud, not rain, not sand. Something moving over land. Say my name, I can make it out. Every word gets swallowed loud. Air is full, the ground is gone. Something here is sitting wrong. 2 minutes. More swarm than land. No room to stand. More wings and sky. It multiplies. More swarm than land. No place to land. Everywhere. Everywhere. Step forward, watch them break, then close again with every wake. Street to wall, to skin to ground. Every inch is moving sound. Hands brush out, just hit more wings. Close alive with crawling things. Turn a corner, lose the way. Nothing looks like it did today. Still here. More swarm than land. No room to stand. More wings and sky. It multiplies. No space left. Not in I said. More swarm than land. No space left. Not in I said. More swarm than land.
The tree was green this morning light. Now it's bone and open side. Leaves gone clean, stripped to frame. Not a trace of what it came. No
one saw it happening.
No.
Just the sound of everything.
Storehouse door already full. Living walls that shift and pull. Grab
higher fast. Run before the moments pass. Feel it move against the side. Something chewing from inside. Hit the bag, it splits apart. Nothing left but skin and bark. Too late. More swarmer, more swarm than land. Oh, no room to stand. Oh, more wings in sky. Oh, it multiplies.
No fuel left, no store, no plan. Nothing left,
Nothing stands. Oh, everywhere. Oh, where did it go?
The locusts were gone, the wind had carried them west. But when morning came, Egypt finally saw what the swarm had left behind. The markets opened slow that day, with baskets nearly bare. No barley piled beside the stalls, no figs or olives there. The bakers stared at empty bins where grain had always been, and merchants counted hollow shells where harvest once had filled. The orchard stood like skeletons, the vineyard stripped and gray. The wealth of Egypt's fertile land had vanished in a day. They said the palace held its stores behind the guarded wall, but whispers ran through every street, there may be none at all. Nothing left to eat, nothing left to grind. The harvest of 1,000 fields erased before our eyes. Nothing left to eat, the oven's silent now, and every empty marketplace makes hunger feel like now. Men wandered through the temple courts with silver in their hands, but bowls once filled a sacred grain lay empty in the sand. The priests still sang to gods of sun, to gods of field and rain, but empty jars beside the altar made the prayer seem vain. Then word began to move again across the starving land. Go south to Goshen's pasture roads where Hebrew storehouse stand. For once before in Egypt's past, when famine ruled the plain, a Hebrew prince had filled the barns and saved the land from pain. Now history turned full circle across the desert floor. The sons of those who once were saved came begging at their door. Nothing left to eat, nothing left to sell. The mighty kingdom of the Nile now knew the taste of hell. Nothing left to eat, the markets fade to dust, and Egypt's hungry multitudes turn south because they must. Nishakinra came down the road with anger in his stride. They trade us goats and sacks of grain while Pharaoh starves with pride. He tossed a bracelet in the sand before the Goshen gate. Take silver, take whatever shines, just end this cursed fate. Till they're told it, watch the trading lines where cattle change their hand. The land once fed by Joseph's dream now begs the dreamer's land. Empty roads, empty fields, empty temple halls, and hunger walked through Egypt's streets louder than the calls. For even kings who rule the Nile cannot command the grain. When heaven closes up the earth against a tyrant's reign, nothing left to eat, nothing left to store. No sign, no sign. Midday sky, then nothing left. Light cut clean like hellback breath. No cloud pass, no shadow move, just the dark and no way through. Hands reach out, can't find the air. Feet won't move from where they were. What you ruled is gone from view. Day belongs to someone new. You said your God could never fall. Blind the eye of Ra, can't stand, God can't turn. Torches lit, but nothing burns. Call our names, say them right. Bring the lamp, we need your light. The ones you beat beneath the sun now lead you step by step through none. What you called weak, what you denied, now walks while Egypt's frozen blind.
Like Eye of Ra.
Now who sees it all?
Blind the eye of Ra. Let the Hebrew fry. Let the evil fall. What you worshipped as your light couldn't see you at all. What you worshipped as your light couldn't see you at all.
Stone can't see, gold can't hear. God you made disappear.
Whoa, blind the eye of Ra. Break the crown and all. Break the crown and all. Blind the eye of Ra. Watch the idols fall. Watch the idols fall.
We walk, you call, you call.